In preparing for today, I've been thinking a lot about my experiences, I guess you could say my religious walk in life. I was raised in religion. I was educated in religion, and it has been part of my life forever in this particular journey that I'm on right now. And I remember the tenets and the ideas of what I heard when I was growing up, and there were a couple of words that pop out at me. And in talking about God, there was this idea of being omnipresent, which means ever present. So, okay, what does that mean? You're saying God is omnipresent. Well, it means that God is ever present. God is just here. And then there was another word, omniscience. And that's a very interesting word. And if you look it up in the dictionary, it's definitely a religious word, because even in the secular dictionary, it has a religious connotation. And it basically says that the state of knowing everything, and it says the divine state of knowing everything, the state of knowing everything through divinity. You know, those kinds of things, depending upon what dictionary you pick up. But you know, if you place onto that an overlay of kind of some, bring some spirituality into it and some ideas, basically what it means is it means that that God is a saturation of let's call it wisdom, a saturation of understanding the length and the depth and the size of any issue, any problem, any healing, any way forward, any construction, any creation. And so I found those words really comforting growing up. Here I am, I'm a little kid running around, and I got my own issues, and I feel my own limitations, and sometimes I'm afraid, and sometimes I'm lonely, and sometimes I don't feel like I'm enough, or whatever there is. But they would say, well, but remember, God is ever present, and God is literally this wisdom. But as I grew older and I began to actually understand the broader teachings that I was being exposed to, basically they told me that at some point, and this is my interpretation of it, they said to me, but you're cut off from that. God is over there and you're over here. And you need to, because there's something missing about you. There's this piece, call it original sin, call it whatever you want to call it. And so you're kind of on the outside of that. And we want you to come onto the inside. And so there's a ritual, and there's something that we can have you do, physically and mentally, to come into the inside, to get into the circle of God. When I was very young and I was turned on to that, I wanted to jump into that circle, and I did the ritual, and and in the tradition that I was in, it was called salvation, and so I did that. I did the acceptance of it and everything like that. But somehow I had a really hard time accessing this presence. And the challenges that came before me, I felt ill-equipped to deal with. And so I always questioned, well, wait a minute, I thought I was inside the circle. I thought that, what's going on here? And then as I got even older and I began to think about it, the fact that I was being told that, well, God is ever present, and you live within the universe of God, basically. But I was taught that God is a physical manifestation who is somewhere. God is a father, or whatever it is. And I thought, well, if God is the father, and I'm not, I have to do something to get back there, then I began to take on some shame around that. And I think that what I've learned in my life and in my professions, and what I've done for, the way I've spent my life, is that some of the shame that we recognize is associated with religion, I think some of it comes from that piece that, well, God is there, but somehow there's something that separates me. It's a level of separation. And so psychologically, it can get into feelings of abandonment and not being enough. and intensifies sometimes our low self-esteem and our fear. And so then the day came when I was a young adult, up around 30, and for me that's a young adult. The older I get, I was introduced to religious science and the teachings of Ernest Holmes. And I had long broken from religion, the religion of my youth and religion in general. And I kind of denounced God, and I denounced it all, but I was chipping away. I was always kind of had an ear on spiritual things. I always kind of found myself, and I'm old enough to remember paperback books and things like that. And I would find myself buying paperback books and walking around with them in my back pocket and reading them. And a lot of them were sort of quasi-spiritual, psycho-spiritual, socially spiritual, anthropologically spiritual. I was kind of chipping on the edge of it. I was looking. In my life, like a lot of this, my life became really challenging in early adulthood. And I think that I was looking for my way, but I still couldn't quite come to terms with the idea of embracing a philosophy. I couldn't really go all in. And then a very dear person in my life who means the world to me, she was someone who saw something in me, said, hey, you know, Andy, there's this place, there's this teaching you can go to. And so I walked into a church of religious science for the first time, what we now call Center for Spiritual Living. And I remember the first minister I ever heard very fondly, and I will always carry her in my heart, and to hear her talk about the idea that this idea of omniscience is that we are literally living in the atmosphere, the consciousness of God. We are surrounded by this wisdom. We are saturated with it. I remember seeing this kind of a tchotchke t-shirt years ago in some gift shop, and it was a Native American, and it was the t-shirt itself was black, and there was this very colorful print on it. This Native American, and he had a fire going, and the flames were coming up, and then the smoke was rising up, and within the smoke were these kind of iconic imagery of things like deer and buffalo and clouds and rain and sun and flowers and butterflies and just, you know, nature and just and all of it seemed to kind of reek of abundance. It was like the abundance of that individual's life. And he was standing there and he's looking up as the smoke rises up into the atmosphere, and his arms are open, and he has this peaceful look on his face that's projected upward. And I remember seeing that t-shirt in a tchotchke shop. And again, this is kind of in my late 20s leading up to that. And I looked at that, and I found myself very emotional about that. And I was so surprised, and at my reaction to it, and I God, that's what I want. I want that openness. I want to know that there is some wisdom that is there. You know, Ernest Holmes is talking about, and really where I want to go with this, when we talk about pray without ceasing, the first part of it is the intuition piece. And I want to talk about that a little bit. We talk about intuition a lot. And intuition, what does that word mean? On a broader sense, it means somehow a knowing. I intuitively think this, I intuitively did that. Ernest Holmes says in his textbook, the intelligence that we find in the animal kingdom, which directs their actions and communicates where to go to find food and shelter, we call instinct. It should be called divine omniscience. So he introduces this word into omniscience. So we think of the instinct of an animal, that thing that guides and directs him. And now Holmes is saying this is part of the omniscience of spirit. And guess where it is? It's inside. It's with us. It's around us, right? He says the same quality, more broadly focused, because we are, we're pretty complicated beings. More broadly focused. The same quality, more broadly focused, makes a conscious appearance in humanity. and it is called intuition. Intuition is spirit in us revealing to us the realities of our innermost infinite wisdom. And so I heard that early on, and I was the type of person, when I got into religious science, I just started, oh, you guys got classes? So I was all in, and I took classes. I took years of classes, which eventually ended up with me becoming a minister and all that. But I mean, I still am just such a learning junkie and class. I just love learning all this. And so I began to explore this idea that we are immersed in spirit, that there was not a disconnect there, that somehow it was all there. Everything we need, all the abundance, all the ideas, everything as we move forward in our evolutionary journey. And I've been watching a lot of BBC America when they have their nights where they dedicate the entire evening to these nature programs, these beautiful, planet Earth and all these things, and they're narrated beautifully. And I was watching one recently, and he was talking about the savannah in Africa, this incredible place that for tens of thousands, millions of years, there has been this life that's been taking place there, the cycles of life, and these beautiful species of animals that inhabit that place are brother and sister beings on this planet. The zebra and the water buffalo and the all these different antelope and all these species of primates and predators and the life that they put together there. This mystical kind of incredible explosion of life experience, this exotic place. And they were saying that we kind of all have this picture in our mind of the savannah when we think of it, and we think of those animals that are following the two seasons in that part of the world, which is the dry season and the rainy season. That's kind of what makes that world tick. That's the intelligence that allows that world to be what it's been for tens of thousands and probably millions of years. And we think about the animals who follow the grasses that grow in the rainy season as they go into the dry season. And the dry season is incredibly dry. It's brittle, dust, dirt, dry, a level of dormancy that begins to overtake life. And the rainy season is so wet and so nourishing that the whole world explodes with flowers and plants and all kinds of little animals that usually burrow deep down into the soil, who can't possibly make it through the dry season, but come in the rainy season. And so we think of these animals, the grazers, these huge, gorgeous, beautiful grazing animals. And we think of them, we probably close our eyes, we think of them making their way across the savannah, all these different herds, hundreds, thousands of some of these species. And they walk and they graze, they walk and they graze, they walk and they graze, they run and they graze, going from one end of the savannah to the other. But there are some animals who live in one place. They don't graze they don't migrate like that. They're not nomadic, they live in one place. And so they are not chasing the grasses of the rainy season. They are in a place where they have evolved to be able to thrive during the deepest, driest season and the deepest, wettest season. In fact, what biology tells us is they've evolved that their diets vary so much in between that they have developed bodies that actually are strengthened and thrive under this diversity of what they have to eat. And one of those is the baboon. And they were talking about the baboon, and they're saying, in the dry season, in the dust, the baboon will dig around for insects, and they can get a little bit of nourishment out of bark and dead grass, but there's a lot of digging, and they have to find roots, and they're right down in the dust and the dirt, and they go out and they forage and they dig around every day, and they have this ability, and when you're watching them in a documentary, it seems like such a hard scrabble life, and then And then the rainy season comes, and literally almost overnight, the entire place changes, and the grasses grow and the flowers come up, and the little frogs come out of the ground and little snails come out of the ground. And now their diet's going to be completely different. And what's amazing to me is that here's one example, and there's probably, there's thousands of examples in this beautiful world that we live in, this gorgeous planet. But here's just one example of a species who open themselves up to the presence, the saturation of God, of Spirit. They get up every day and they simply open up to the potentiality of the day for them to thrive and for them to be able to rear their young and to live and be together and express in the way that they express, because they're opening up to Spirit. And Ernest Holmes said, we would look at them and say, well, these are their instincts to dig around for the grubs or the termites or the roots or whatever. But see, but Ernest Holmes comes about and says, but he goes on to say, no, this is the omniscience of Spirit that breaks loose of them, within them. And so basically what this is the part of, when we talk about the Science of Mind formula for prayer, the 5-step prayer, the first step is God is. God is. That's what I think touched me so deeply about the t-shirt that I saw many years ago. This Native American was basically looking up as the smoke goes into the heavens, and he was in his own way saying, God is. This is God, man. This is God. I'm not separate from God. God's not separate from me. This is God. In all of its wisdom, in all of its authority, in all of its power. I'm in the presence and the power of God, and the presence and the power of God is within me. And it's really interesting that somehow, I remember asking one time early on in Science of Mind, because one of the questions religion has to take on is, well, how do we understand when challenges come up? How do we understand when we start taking our life into a painful direction, or a direction doesn't work for us? In other words, where is God? Doesn't that open us up to a duality piece where we say, well, I must be cut off from God. God must be somewhere else. So sometimes prayer for us, at least for me, my limited interpretation of it when I was a kid was, hey, God, I need you to come over here, man. I got some problems. I got, I need you. Tell me what I got to do to connect with you, because I got to bring you here. So I asked my Science of Mind teachers early on, I said, well, how do we look at that? And one of them, and they all said this, but one of them said it in a way that just meant so much to me and touched me so deeply, is this idea of, the problem isn't that God has left us, it's that we've left God. And this is where Ernest Holmes drops in his teaching the idea of freedom. In other words, as human beings, we have the freedom to believe that there is no potentiality around us. There is no way to thrive. There's no way to make it through this around us. In other words, that's our atheistic moment. But that doesn't mean that God is anywhere. God is right here. If the baboon were to wake up one morning during the dry season and have a crisis of survival and sit and not engage in the God that's around them, him, her, then he's in trouble. Because the first part of it, God is all there is the recognition. But the second part of it is that we have to affirm that and bring it into our own existence, which takes us into movement, acceptance, openness. And so I go back to my BBC America on one of their programs, and they're talking about the baboons have come through the dry season, and we have those younger baboons. They're not little kids anymore. They're kind of adolescent baboons. They're kind of growing up. Maybe they've been through one rainy season. Maybe this is their first one. I don't know. But they're kind of on their own. They're not hanging out with their mom totally. And suddenly there's so much water everywhere. There's so much green everywhere. There's so much grass everywhere. And the rain has been so intense that these swampy areas start coming up, and these ponds begin to form, and they run from anywhere from a half a foot to 2 or 3 feet deep, and they're out there, and it's in these ponds that these beautiful plants and snails and frogs begin to come up. And so the adolescent baboon, and it's great because the way this guy narrates it, he's looking over there, he's looking kind of across this pondy area, and there's some really good looking flowers over there he can eat. There's some great roots and stuff over there, some great stalks, and there's probably some snails on that he could eat. And so she begins to go through the water, and he's getting deeper into the water, and he's really uncomfortable. And the narrator says, the whole world is filled with abundance, even if getting there is uncomfortable. I love that, because that's the affirming part of it. This is where I got to go. This is what I have to do to reach the abundance. This is what I have to do to let go. In other words, what the baboon is doing is he's letting go of his fear. And you can see the fear when you really watch him carefully in this documentary, because he's got his little arms up in the air, and first of all, he's knee deep, and then he's waist deep, and he's like, I'm pretty uncomfortable with this, man. I'm in the water. I don't know where this is going, but I got to get to the flowers. I got to get to the plants. And there's a surrender. There's an opening up. As human beings, our opening up is releasing and letting go a consciousness that is limiting. A consciousness that literally puts blinders over our eyes to potentiality because of low self-esteem, because we don't feel like we're good enough, because we feel like we're cut off. And Ernest Holmes later on in his textbooks talks about the idea, this is the kind of consciousness that we have to begin to let go of. This is our release. This is our letting go, in order to be able to affirm. Because when the baboon goes to the flower, to the plant, to the snail, to the frog, he is affirming, she is affirming the presence of spirit. This is here for me to thrive. This is here for me to survive. This is here to keep me healthy. And I'm going to do what I got to do. I'm going to open up to it. You know, I think that this piece that I read you, where Ernest Holmes talks about nature. Ernest Holmes was a guy who spent a lot of his adulthood in Southern California, and we know that he would come up annually to the Monterey area and spend time in the Asilomar area, right there on the coast. And I imagine I close my, for any of you who have been to Asilomar, across Highway 1 there from Asilomar is this wonderful beach. And when you go to Asilomar and you walk on that beach, that's a beach where Holmes and his cronies walked on, all these metaphysicians, all these religious scientists, all these people, and they would walk that beach and they would talk about things, and I imagine they rolled up their pant legs and they hiked up their skirts, and they allowed the water to come into their ankles, and they would walk and they would feel as the water goes away and the sand moves away, and they would see the crabs and the sand dollars, they would see the abalone shells, they would see the seals, they would see the otters, they would see the birds, all those great birds of the ocean. And Holmes out there, and they said, look at this. Look at this omniscience of God. All these living things, all these brothers and sisters that we share this planet with, and they know intuitively what they're doing. And we have the same opportunity. I don't know if this is true totally, but I can't imagine that baboons walk around, or I'm sorry, I can't imagine that they sit around and they argue about not being cared for by this universe. I don't think that they refuse to dig in the dirt for the grubs because of their ego. I don't imagine that they don't cross over to get the flowers and the plants because they don't think they're good enough, or because they allow fear to overtake them. But we as human beings do. Our prayer practice, God is all there is. I am. God is omniscience. I am part of that. I affirm that. You know, there's a prayer-a-thon coming up, and I know that you guys got some. It's coming up this week, and I'm sure you got an email about that. And so we, in this teaching, we talk about the idea that I really like you know, when you're with somebody and you're talking to them and maybe they're going through a challenge, and you say to them, well, you're in my prayers. We all say that. That's a beautiful sentiment, because we basically are saying we bring you to the altar of this mystical practice called prayer, where we actively engage our consciousness into this process of healing, of creation, of abundance. But I really think that as metaphysicians, at least whether we say this or not, it'd be in our consciousness that you are within my affirmations. I affirm for you this, because it's already here. And maybe you don't see it, or maybe you don't feel it, but it's here. And so when we talk about prayer without ceasing, which is the title for today, is that, you know, we have this idea that, you know, I mean, I'm talking metaphorically here, kind of, you know, we get down on our knees and we fold our hands, you know, in God, and we get quiet, and we go into a formal prayer practice, which I do, which we all do, which is fine. But the prayer without ceasing basically is, it is the baboon who is walking through the water. That's a prayer. It's tuning my ears so that, because I know I'm looking for some wisdom, and I know it's around me somewhere, and there's going to be a book, there's going to be a website, there's going to be a conversation, there's going to be something on TV, there's going to be something on the radio, and so my ears are open, That is part of my prayer practice. I am tuning myself for potentiality to show up. I am affirming the omniscience of God. That's also our prayer practice. And I know that, and I'm coming up on my time here, but I know that when the fire happened, you know, what now, a couple of years ago, and I was living in paradise, and so, you know, anyway, so the fire comes, and so you don't have a home, and you don't have your life, and you don't have your center, and things like that. And I know that first of all, you know, I'm standing down here in Chico. Judy and I are in some Rayleigh's parking lot somewhere, and she gets a phone call or something from a sister who says, Judy, come to our house. Okay. We didn't look for that, just came. That was part of the rainy season, you know, on the savannah. Okay, so we went. We were the baboon. We went there. And so the next thing was, in the next day or so, I'm thinking, okay, we have to find a home. What do I do? A home. What do I do? We have to find a place. And so I was in a store, and I'm standing in line, and a grocery store or something, and the guy ahead of me was good friends with the checker, the person behind the cash register, and they're talking, and the Paradise guy says, well, you know, when I left Paradise, my wife and I, we have a travel trailer, and so I'm going to go get that set up somewhere. So we're going to live there for a while. I thought, okay, trailer. I heard it. Okay. So then I go out. I have trailer in my head, and I'm thinking, yeah, I've seen trailers in parks at different places. I'll bet we could get into a trailer, you know, and I'm thinking about money. I'm thinking about using resources. And so I share this with Judy, and Judy, who's also a metaphysician. Okay, you know, so she gets online, and she, you know, I don't know anything about I'm not a camping trailer kind of guy. I'm not an RV kind of guy. I never have been. I don't know anything about it. I don't even know where you go and get them, right? And so she calls me up. She goes, I went online. There's a trailer for sale on this lot up in Redding. This is the name of it. This is the address. You know, okay, you know, so I go up I-5 and I go to Redding. I find this place. I go in, I look at this used trailer, really good price, but I could tell it wasn't going to work for us. And so I said, gee, this isn't going to work. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm standing there. And I think that if you could see my thought bubble above me, there were dollar signs in it because I was trying to figure out the money. And so I'm standing there and I go, okay, well, I don't know what's going to work. He said, well, can I show you some new trailers? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. That's when the dollar signs began to show up there. And the guy looked at me and he said, you know, you had insurance on your house, right? I said, well, of course I did. He said, well, I know that you probably haven't been paid because it's only been a couple of days, but we know how to work with insurance companies if you need to finance something through us or buy something. There it is. Spirit showed up, omniscience, right? And so then I began to go through the process of what it is. And I happen to have a brother-in-law with me who was two things. First of all, he's a good businessman. And secondly, he's an RV guy. And he helped walk me through it. He said, hey, I'll go with you, Andy. Let's go look at some trailers. And so all of these things began to open up. The rainy season began to open up with the flowers and the frogs and the snails. And my job was simply to affirm the fact that I was going to wade into the water. And if you did a documentary of Andy, who was the baboon, the narrator would say, the abundance is there, even if it's uncomfortable. And it was uncomfortable. But as a metaphysician, as a religious scientist, and I am so thankful for this teaching because it told me you have to walk forward through the pond to get to the flower. That's prayer. Every conversation with a salesperson, a finance person, a manager of a park, every single conversation was an act of prayer. To walk into it open, like the Native American who looked up into the smoke and said, it's all God, it's all the Creator, it's all here. The sustenance, the way to thrive, the way to survive. What is our frame of mind? What is our consciousness as we get up every day and we live our life in terms of being open and working with the omniscience of Spirit? That's what prayer without ceasing is. As metaphysicians, we believe that we live in an energetic universe and call this energy spirit, and we work with that spirit. The same way that the baboon works with its environment. It's working with God. Praying without ceasing is having an ongoing relationship with Spirit. The Spirit that is around us all the time. And I know that right now, as I speak to you in your living rooms, and your kitchens, and your backyard, and your shop, and your garage, and wherever you're listening to this, and we have this big thing going on globally, Spirit is here. There is no virus that takes away the omniscience of Spirit. None. We are literally immersed in Spirit, immersed in wisdom, immersed in direction, immersed in potentiality. And my greatest desire is that you remember that. So I would like to take us into a prayer to bring this to a close. So as we come together in consciousness, we take a moment to express God is. That's it. God is. And I am. God is omniscience. I am affirming. I am accepting. I am open. I am a practitioner of the energy of God. And as we find ourselves in the midst of whatever challenge there may be, we come into that place of praying without ceasing, of walking, talking, thinking, living, eating, sleeping our prayer. our prayer practice, of being open to Spirit, receptive to Spirit, and a co-creator with Spirit. And I am so grateful for that. And in my gratitude for this, I'll let my word go, knowing that it's so. And so it is.